Hi there, it's Gabriele Nicolet from SpeechKids, where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their little kids. And today I am delighted to be speaking with Gabrielle Czaja, who is a physical therapist and an Alexander Technique practitioner. Did I get that right, Gabrielle?
Teacher, Alexander Technique teacher, right.
Thank you.
Right.
And we have a good long laugh about the fact that we pronounce our names very similarly. They are spelled differently. But when we first met, it's something that we both still chuckle about, isn't it?
Right. Hi, Gabrielle.
Hi, Gabrielle. How are you? So
we have fun.
We do have fun. Tell us, how did you get to be a PT, and how does that work in terms of physical therapy?
So actually, physical therapy for me, Gabrielle, it's really a calling. In the late 70s, girls were being encouraged to be professionals. So on a career day, I found a book called So You Want to Be a Physical Therapist. And it really spoke to me. I mean, it really deeply spoke to me. So that was just always in my head. I went to college, pre-med, like all of my friends, and then realized that wasn't really my calling. And I eventually got to physical therapy school. So I have a master's in physical therapy. And, my dad's an organic chemist. My mom was a social worker. So I kind of feel like physical therapy is really the perfect melding of two of them. Yeah. So a physical therapist works with people with all different kinds of injuries, strains, sprains, stress-related issues. Physical therapists work with infants and young kids. They work with adults at the other end of the life spectrum, trauma, neurological injuries, birth trauma, all different kinds of things. So I became an Alexander Technique teacher just a few years after becoming a physical therapist, because I had an injury that was not getting better. And I had access to excellent medical care. I was really very lucky. And I heard about the Alexander Technique, and I still remember my very first Alexander Technique workshop. I thought, oh my gosh, I have to do the training. And the reason was, after this workshop and after this lesson, I felt so natural and supported and organized in my body. And I thought, oh, this is really yummy. I want more of this. And at the same time, as a brand new physical therapist, I was working with people that had been very badly injured. And they weren't able to respond to the help that they were needing. And what I figured out was that some people need a little bit of extra help beyond the medical system. The Alexander Technique is what we call neuromuscular reeducation. You're using your brain, you're using your nervous system and your thinking to help improve how you move through space, how well you breathe, how you sit, stand, walk. It's really, the Alexander Technique is really about tapping into and activating your postural mechanism in a very dynamic way, right? So young kids need this, teenagers need this, adults need this. But what I thought was that the Alexander Technique is the missing link. So somebody does really well in physical therapy, but they get to a certain point and maybe they're not getting to where they want to get to. And so then the Alexander Technique can take them a step further. Now, I use both in my practice. Some people come in to see me and I say, well, this is what we can do with physical therapy. This is how Alexander Technique can help you. And then we just figure out what's best for that person.
So I have a million questions. Oh my gosh.
Good.
So for people, I think the first thing I want to start with is the thing that you kind of alluded to, which is this connection between knowing that you're in your body.
Yeah.
Which is something that I don't think we spend enough time on, maybe a little bit more nowadays. But so can you sort of explain why that's important to even realize, have the awareness that I am in a body?
When we're in our body, I mean, on sort of a metaphysical level, we are in ourself. Our body is our container for our heart, for our soul, for our mind. Our body is this amazing sensory organ so that we can function in the world. So if we're not comfortable in our own skin, to use a colloquial phrase, then it's hard for us to necessarily both perceive what's happening in the world and then respond in the way that we want to respond to, or to even sense what's going on around us so that we can engage with other people in our environment. The other thing is if we're not aware of our body in a very simple sense, we're more susceptible to injuries. We're much more susceptible to stress. Like now.
Like now during a pandemic, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So for many of the families who watch this, they have young children who are probably, some of them at least, experiencing what you're talking about, which is they don't have good awareness of their bodies, and they work hard to be in their bodies. But I would suspect that, adults who are stressed, as you're saying, which is pretty much all of us right now, are also dealing with some of that too. So what are some things, like, I'm not going to ask you exactly how you do this, but like, what are the steps? What's the framework by which we get back into our bodies, or through which you treat this? I don't know quite how to phrase it. Well,
so it depends on the person. And I'm going to double back to the age group that you work with, Gabrielle. As you know from all of your experience and studies, there are dynamic and postural reflexes that are milestone patterns that are they are deeply hardwired into the human organism, into Homo sapiens. And for lots of different reasons, sometimes these dynamic and postural reflexes can either not get completely integrated. That might happen in utero, it might happen after a child is born, but either the wires are not as tight as they could be, or they're a little bit too loose. And so the primary milestones, the movement milestone patterns that are just part of what we need as our basic foundation in the world, those are actually the building blocks for being in our bodies. Right. And those are the sorts of things that set us up to function as easily as we can during the day, whether it's talking, reading, writing, engaging with other people, other kids, other adults. And then under stressful circumstances, if our reflexes are not completely as organized as they could be, then we're definitely much more susceptible to stress. And then that's when emotional and physical and cognitive difficulties can arise. So I think that, go ahead.
No, it's interesting because, this is something that I observe in my practice a lot, where we've got, and this is back to the point about being in your body, we've got a body that's disorganized, that's trying to get stable, that's trying to just feel good in their own skin. And then on top of that, we're layering problem solving or academics, or even just the simple act of talking. Trying to add some language onto this, but I'm just trying to be stable. I'm just trying to walk on this 3-inch balance beam. And now you're going to ask me to learn to read. That's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. Yeah.
And so what you're talking about is really shoring up a foundational skill.
Absolutely. Right.
So that we can layer stuff on top. And so what happens though when the foundation has holes in it? Can we go back and fix that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing about reflexes is that we all come into this world with strengths and we all have vulnerabilities. And when we're looking and evaluating reflexes, either in a child or an adult, we're not doing diagnostics. We're looking to see, and this is so important, we're looking to see where there are some vulnerabilities, and how do we strengthen those? How do we take those vulnerabilities and strengthen them as much as possible so that this kid can just develop into their full capacity and their full potential, and they're strong and they can be in the world however it is they want to be in the world. So, the reflexes are in our brain stem and in our midbrain. So they're not cognitive. And I think that's really important for little ones, because sometimes when they're not able to do what they want to do, it's not because they don't want to, and it's not because they're not trying. There could be some loose wires, some weaker neural connections, midbrain and brainstem. And there's no amount of cognition that's gonna help that.
No
so strategies. Cognition alone, Yeah, there's no strategies, right? So for both parents and kids, to the extent that we can shore up the foundation and we can make it as strong as possible, then everybody's happier.
Yep.
And then we're less susceptible to stress.
That's super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, because you're not trying to fill a hole.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so how do we know if there is a problem with reflexes? Like what is the diagnostic process look like for that?
You know, it's a little slippery because what is important to a family or a pediatrician or a teacher is different for everybody. And so there are certain things, you know, if a child is still not walking around 14 months, well, that's a really obvious indicator. You know, as you were saying earlier, if kids are not speaking around a certain age. So we have these general milestone patterns. And so if we're aware that something's not quite right, everything seems fine, but maybe there's something we should check out, then that's a signal to kind of dig a little bit deeper and ask some more questions. And that could happen at 3, that could happen at 13, that could happen at 35.
So interesting. And
yeah.
So that qualitative, the thing you're talking about is something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is why we connected so well, which is it's the qualitative information, right?
Yes.
Yes, you can walk, but
right.
How can you walk? How
easily
can you walk?
That's right.
How well? How fluidly? What's the qualitative analysis there, right?
That's right. That's right.
And so in the same way, and so maybe you can walk perfectly fine at age, whatever, call it 14 months, call it 3 years old.
Yeah.
And then you get to a certain point where it's not quite enough anymore. So it's served and now it doesn't serve, which I think is your point about sort of 13 and 35, which is it's been good enough till now.
Right.
And now that's not good enough.
Right. I mean, and for example, that person could be a little bit more prone to ankle sprains, like multiple ankle sprains. And a lot of times ankle sprains are ignored. You know, they're so far away from our brains. We just don't pay attention to them. So we get better. And then all of a sudden at 45, you've had a lot of ankle sprains and now your knee is hurting. So that's one example in a more orthopedic realm. Now in the realm with younger kids, you know, they could be sitting at a table and just trying to write, and they can't write very well because they can't grip the pencil really well. And so they can do it, but then their body's getting all scrunched up because they're trying to write. You know, one of the most common and obvious reflexes that everybody's familiar with is the grasp. So in an infant, you know, you put your finger in an infant's hand and they automatically grab our finger. And you know, when they're just born, it's not because they like us. It's a reflex. They just do that automatically, right? Okay. So later on at 2 and 3, it becomes voluntary. So we might say, okay, take my hand, we're going to cross the street, and they can say yes or no. So then it's voluntary. So if for some reason, you know, around 2 or 3, this is still happening as an automatic thing and it's not voluntary, then we kind of begin to ask a few questions. Because grasp has everything to do with reading and writing. It's got to do with left, right, midline. It's got to do with communicating in the world. And because it's got to do with communication, believe it or not, grasp is relevant to speech.
It's all relevant to speech.
It's all connected.
It's all in there.
And speech, because speech is all about how we are in the world, is completely relevant to our balance and our posture and how we engage, how we learn. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I love that example. Can you give us another example? Maybe a little older kid, like a 4-year-old? I don't know. I'm thinking about the 4-year-old who's clumsy at preschool or at pre-K, who like falls down a lot, and just sort of wondering about that guy.
Yeah. So crawling, of course, is one of the most important things. And what's interesting is what we call a certain kind of crawling In the pediatric world, and I think that you would, you talk about this too, is crawling is actually being on our bellies and sort of crawling like a lizard, right? Creeping is being on hands and knees.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of kids skip this step.
Yeah, they do.
A lot of kids skip this step. And they skip it for lots of different kinds of reasons, but it's one of the most essential developmental movement patterns that the human being really needs to accomplish. Mm-hmm. It's really foundational. It's as foundational as what we were talking about, grasp. It's about weight bearing through our shoulder girdle, through our pelvic girdle. It's about left, right, of course, left, right brain, arms and legs moving, balance, posture. It's all about posture. Being able to sit at a desk and do our studies.
Now, this is key, right? Because we put 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds into chairs when not irrespective of whether their feet can touch the floor, which is like a whole other thing. Expect them to be writing and thinking and learning. Right. Meanwhile, they can't sit up.
They haven't crawled. Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. They haven't crawled. Right. Now, what's interesting is in relationship to sitting at a desk and reading and writing, there's a reflex called the symmetrical tonic neck reflex. Mm-hmm. And this is a really important one because we call it STNR, because it's the reflex that we need to have really deeply integrated in order to sit with our knees bent and our arms bent and do our schoolwork. Mm-hmm. So the way that you see some vulnerabilities in a kid with maybe an STNR that's just not as fine-tuned as it could be is they will anchor their legs around a chair. Yep. They will sit cross-legged. They will sit on top of one foot as if they're doing a yoga pose on their chair. Mm-hmm. And then they might also kind of, do this. They're trying to write like this, so. And then some kids, they just don't want to sit. Avoidance, as you know, it's a very unfortunate and I think misunderstood behavior in a lot of kids, also in a lot of adults, because we don't know that there's something to know. We don't know that we're avoiding something, and certainly a child doesn't. Mm-hmm. Child doesn't know that they're avoiding schoolwork because they don't feel comfortable sitting. So it's a little bit of trial and error to help our kids figure out what they need the best. Yeah.
And you can I hesitate to use the word fix, but you can treat that. You can make that.
Yes. And I would put this in the realm of body education. Mm-hmm. It is intervention, but it's education that's therapeutic. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's physical therapy. Yes, it's speech therapy. Yes, it's occupational therapy. Mm-hmm. But what we're really doing is waking up neural connections, and we're really getting them really finely tuned. Mm-hmm. A lot of my teenage and adult clients want to, when we're doing these movement patterns, they want to muscle their way through it, right? Because we're used to lifting weights and doing all this stuff. But when we're working and reintegrating a movement pattern, it's very subtle. It's very quiet. It's not muscle work because we're talking to the brain. So there's a lot of repetition, but it's quiet work. The most important component of any time you're working with reflexes is safety, because a child has to feel safe to learn. So there's a quiet, repetitive, just saying hello to the brain. And what I often say to teenagers and adults when we're doing reflex integration movements is that we're waking up and strengthening, we're not working out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our health and fitness really comes down to really good brain-body integration. Mm-hmm. That's the foundation.
I love it. There's so much.
It's amazing. I know.
I know. It's like, I want to do a whole other hour, but we're going to wrap this up because that's like a nice little pin for now. If people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
They can call me. My number is 202-223-4943. You can also find me online. My website is GabrielleCzaja.com. And you can send me an email, Gabrielle@GabrielleCzaja.com. You can also get in touch with you, Gabrielle, and I know that you can connect them with me too.
Exactly. And I'll put your information in the quote unquote show notes.
Okay. Okay.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh gosh, Gabrielle, it's my pleasure. This has been great fun.
So fun. Bye-bye.